Membership growth in 2020, down by almost 50%. This decline continues by Eric Johnson, for a 4-part viewpoint on Mormonism series on this topic airing February 15 to 18, 2021. Click these links. Part 1, Part 2, Part 3, Part 4. Note, this article was modified on April 4, 2021. Over the first weekend of April, LDS Church leaders announced their lowest baptismal convert rate number in many decades due to COVID-19 sidelining thousands of its missionaries. A total of 126,000 new members were baptized in 2020, down from 249,000 in 2019, which is close to a 50% drop, with many members leaving the church. As well, this is the first time in modern history that the membership gains did not grow by 6 figures, as the church grew in 2020 by a total of only 98,627. This translates into an anemic 0.6% growth rate to a total of 16.6 million, down from a less than impressive 1.54% growth rate from the previous year. Mormon missionaries only had the first 75 days of the year to do their work with no hindrances, but most were ordered to return home in mid-March. Even in the fall and winter, few missionaries were unleashed to do the work they would normally accomplish in many countries, including canvassing homes and making calls on potential converts. While some members were certainly added through electronic media, not having the faith 60,000 or so missionaries in strategic places and working full-time ended up being quite costly to the church's bottom line. It should be pointed out that the baptismal convert number is anticipated when it is released each April at the time of General Conference. Also, the church has averaged 100,000 baby blessings per year to a number called Children of Record, but this growth in 2020 was down by a third, with just 65,550 children blessed. This too is the lowest number in recent years. Information provided by the LDS Church. The LDS Church does not document how many people leave the church in any given year. Instead, leaders provide a list of numbers each April from the previous year. The information includes total stakes, missions, districts, wards, and branches, the total membership number as of that year, new children of record, and baptized converts missionary totals, both full-time as well as church service temples that were dedicated or rededicated, along with the total temples in operation. The church accounting firm is the only entity with the information on how the final membership number is derived. Here are some factors that should be considered. Children of record. Children under the age of 9 who have received a blessing are classified as children of record. The average annual growth is about 100,000 for these children who receive temporary member numbers but are not considered members of the church until they are baptized and confirmed. If they are baptized between 8 and 9, they are not recorded as converts but are added into the total membership number. Children 9 or older to 17 who get baptized. Although the church does not provide the exact number, those children who are baptized at the age of 9 or older are counted as convert baptisms for that year. Most people wrongly assume that converts refer to those who came into the church as adults, mainly through missionary activity. Yet these children are mostly belonging to parents who are church members. Does it make sense that a preteen or teen, most likely living in an LDS nuclear family, should be considered a convert? One can only imagine how many of the 126,000 convert baptisms in 2020 were performed on those baptized after 8 but before the age of 17. If even 50,000 of those converts involved children, then the conversion number of regular converts becomes even less impressive, perhaps even as few as 6 or 7,000 per month. One returned missionary wrote me to confirm my suspicion. He wrote, "I was on my mission in Utah during 1991-93. The Salt Lake City mission baptized around 300 converts a month. However, about half were 9 to 17-year-olds. Many of us missionaries would get a list from the ward clerk called the Bishop's Action List. It provided the names of those in the ward boundaries who had been blessed but were not baptized. We wouldn't touch them while they were 8, but when they turned 9 we knocked on their families' doors. We were able to baptize many of these 9, 10, and 11-year-olds. I'm sure to this day that missionaries in heavily populated LDS areas baptize children over 8, fluffing the convert baptisms for the church." Personal email to me, 2/17/2021. Notice that the missionaries did not attempt to get 8-year-olds baptized, but rather aimed their efforts at those who were 9 or older. Letting these children go unbaptized until at least the age of 9 helped pad the convert numbers. And how easy is it to get preteens teens from LDS families to get baptized? Family and peer pressure make these the simplest converts of all. This returned missionary also explained, though my mother was LDS, and I was blessed in the church, I wasn't baptized until I was 10. It wasn't until my mission in the early 90s that I learned that I was identified as a convert. Unfortunately, there were times that my fellow missionaries or Pioneer Heritage members would make me feel that my family was less than theirs because they were baptized as children of record and I was a convert. In essence, then, these church leaders were willing to allow those children to remain unbaptized until at least the age of 9, while opening them up to ridicule from their LDS peers once they were baptized as converts. And what if the child had been hit by a car at, say, the age of 8.5? Where would a soul have been destined? Certainly not the celestial kingdom. Stated another way, the child's eternal destiny is put at risk for the sake of upping the church's convert numbers. Does this seem like a loving policy? Is this what Jesus would do? One other writer wrote, concerning 9-year-old convert baptisms, I served a mission for the LDS Church from 1969 to 1971. 2 of my convert baptisms were children that were 9 and 10 years old at the time of their baptisms. My companion and I received credit for 2 convert baptisms when we baptized them. The attempt was made to try to reactivate their Jack Mormon father. That didn't work. He never came back to church. I know, therefore, that the practice of counting 9 and 10-year-olds as converts goes back at least as far as 1969. Deceased members, those who have died in the past year, are taken off the church rolls. The number is not publicly released by the church. Members who have officially left the church, as mentioned, this number is also not provided by the church. A secular organization, quitmormon.org, helps members resign their membership, although the church has made it more difficult for members to resign by requiring a notarized statement rather than just a photocopy of a driver's license. Regardless, the annual number from this category has certainly grown over the past decades based on our conversations with former Mormons. As a side note, it should be pointed out the church's total membership number accounts for all members of record, not active members. Some have estimated that fewer than half of all members of record are actively involved in their church. Those members who rarely, if ever, go to church services, refuse to accept church callings, and fail to tithe are still counted the same way as those who do everything the church requires, including prioritizing regular attendance at the temple, unless the inactive member requests to have his or her name taken off the church rolls or church discipline, i.e., disfellowshipping or excommunication, is administered. He or she remains on the roll. Meanwhile, there hasn't been an active movement by church leaders to pare down the rolls. With that said, here is an accounting of the LDS Church's growth during the past 3 decades, with the rounding of numbers to the next 500. All numbers have been taken from the church's annual reports. Considerations in understanding the growth rate of the LDS Church. It wasn't many years ago when the church appeared to be on pace to become a religion of triple-digit millions in the upcoming year. In 1983, sociologist Rodney Stark predicted that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints would grow between 60 million to 267 million by the year 2080. He made those predictions on there being decade growth between 30 to 50%. In 1998, Stark said that the LDS Church had already grown faster than his prognosis, and his numbers may have underestimated his figures from 16 years before. Source: more than 2 decades later after Stark's comments, we have the advantage of looking back and seeing how his prediction is looking. What can be easily seen is that the church's growth over the past 2 decades has completely stalled, as can be seen in the graph above. The LDS Church grew by a record 331,000 baptized converts in 1990, moving the membership at that time to a total of 7.76 million. This reflected more than a 4% growth rate. However, there are some things that a sociologist like Stark could not have been able to predict unless he had a crystal ball, which we will discuss in a moment. In recent years, people have been leaving the church in droves. Patrick Mason, head of Mormon history and culture at Utah State University, told the Salt Lake Tribune, "We know that there continues to be an exodus from the church. This has been one of the main stories in the 21st century, and may be accelerating over the past decade." Salt Lake Tribune, Religion, A6, 116-21. It is a gargantuan task for the church to compete with the percentage of growth from previous years. For instance, there were 243,000 converts in 2003, which computes to close to 12 million members that year, and a 2.03% rate of growth. The number of baptized converts was practically identical to the converts received 16 years later in 2019. However, the rate of growth in 2019 was only 1.5%, which is a lower percentage than in 2003 because more than 4.5 million additional members had joined the church during that decade and a half. Here is a chart comparing the 2 years. Throughout the decade of the 1990s, all but 3 years had more than 300,000 converts. Yet the church has never grown by more than 300,000 converts even once in the 21st century. The lowest percentage of growth during the decade of the 90s was 1999, 2.85%. By 2000, the number dropped to 2.48%. Since 2008, the rate of growth has remained steadfast under 2%, with nothing higher than a 1.51% rate since 2016. For the sake of comparison, let's use the numbers from the decade of 2010, and assume that, beginning Indiana 2010, the percentage of growth increased to 3% for each year. With that new percentage in mind, let's see what this increase would do to the overall numbers, even though the actual numbers are used, not the revised numbers. With the 3% growth added on each year, the number of baptized converts would have been double during the years 2017 to 2019. Meanwhile, the church membership would be 2 million more, 18,555,000, than the 2019 church membership number of 16,565,000. If the church ends up remaining at an average 1.5% convert baptism growth rate, in the next 5 years, 18 million members won't be reached until 2024. At the earliest, as it can be seen here, there is a huge difference between 1.5% and 3% growth, 200 million members. Let's go back to Stark's prediction, and his belief that he may have underestimated the growth of the church a decade and a half after laying out the numbers of 60 to 267 million. Based on recent history, will the church even get close to these numbers? The answer is no, not even close. At the time Stark spoke in 1998, the church was growing by more than a rate of 4% a year, which should be considered an amazing feat. Between 1990-99, the church grew by almost 3 million members, 2.993 million, equaling 38.6% growth during that decade. If this type of growth had continued, then yes, Stark's prediction would be right in line. However, things slowed down tremendously as the church entered the 21st century. Between 2000 to 2009, the church grew by 24.8% in the decade, with 200,000 fewer baptized converts, 2.756 million, than the previous decade. Then, between 2010 to 2019, the church grew by only 2.434 million members, which is a 17.22% rate. Here are the decade numbers compared: 1990-99, 38.6% growth; 2000-09, 24.8%; 2010-19, 17.22%. The percentages for the past 3 decades have gone down for the first time in the history of the LDS Church. While the church continues to grow, it is taking place at a much slower rate than just a few decades ago. Let's suppose that the church could maintain that 17.22% growth, which is certainly better than losing members as many mainstream Protestant denominations have been doing. Using that as our guide, let's see where the church would be in 2080. Based on this hypothetical 17.22% growth rate, then, we can see that the church would have fewer than 43 million members in 2080, more than 17 million away from what Stark called a conservative number of 60 million members. What has caused the church growth to decline? Probably one of the biggest reasons for the stunted growth in the LDS Church is easier access to information. The Internet was in its infancy during the first half of the 1990s. At the beginning of the Internet era, dial-up was the normal way that people were able to log online, which, as the baby boomers and Gen X generations can testify, resulted in slow speeds and dropped connections. Finding information on the World Wide Web was possible, but not as sophisticated as many expect today. When they go online,